I'd like to welcome our listeners today to yet another episode of the Healthcare Leadership Excellence Podcast. I just want to give a brief background on our guest today. I'm a graduate of Brigham Young University, and so I get their alumni magazine. A little while back, my wife was reading the alumni magazine, and she found an article by our guest today. And it was about this jaw-dropping event that he participated in. And being somewhat of an outdoor nut myself, although I have to admit ahead of time that I've really never been attracted to biking in any sense of the word, but it described the Tour Divide. And just to give a little background on this, and our guest will give a lot more details in a few minutes, but it's a 2,700 mile from the Canadian to the Mexican border that goes along the Continental Divide. And to make it a little more impactful, there's around 200,000 feet of elevation gain. Now, to put this in perspective, just imagine starting at the bottom of a hill and 37 miles later, you're on top of that hill. So, to put this into perspective, that's just to me jaw dropping, as it hopefully is to some of our listeners. And so I was able to track down the author of this article, and he was gracious enough to give us of his time this afternoon. And I would like to welcome Dr. Ty Hopkins, Chair of the Department of Exercise Science at Brigham Young University, and our guest today. And might I say, I just love the quote, Dr. Hopkins of Yogi Berra. It ain't bragging if you can do it. So, well, welcome to our episode today. Thanks for being with us.
Of course. Glad to be here.
So, give us a little background on Dr. Hopkins, what brings you to be chair of a department of a D1 university. Talk to us a little about your background.
So I was your classic undergraduate student at BYU back in the early 90s. And I didn't know what I wanted to do. I thought it was in medicine somewhere, but I took this little class called Introduction to Athletic Training from one of my mentors, Erling Durant. And she taught me about this area of athletic training. And in the process of taking this class, I fell in love. I knew this is what I wanted to do. And so I studied athletic training as an undergraduate. I went to Indiana and studied as a master's student, and I was fully prepared to go practice as an athletic trainer. In fact, I had a job offer in hand, and one of my mentors said to me, you ought to think about a PhD. And at the time, that was not really at the forefront of my mind. I was interested in going making some money somewhere. And he made it attractive for me in terms of an offer. And I talked to my wife about it, and we thought, man, we should do this. And it was the best decision I ever made. I got a PhD. I fell in love with the research that I do that's related to orthopedic injury and the kind of the intersection of the nervous system and the musculoskeletal system and how we move and how those movements actually lead to or prevent injury. I've been doing that. I've been at BYU for 21 years. I was at Illinois State before that for another 3 years. And I'm one of those guys that I've never worked a day in my life. I love what I do.
Excellent. So you mentioned sitting in a reception area, picking up Outside magazine and reading about the toughest race, thinking it was the Tour de France, but then you realize it's the Tour Divide. And then over the next almost decade, you prepare for this and you finally write it in 2018. So tell us a bit about not just the physical game, but the mental game of just going through the training. We'll hit the actual race in a few minutes, but just for a decade, talk to us about that a bit.
Yeah, it's interesting. I remember that was in 2010. I read that article and kind of fell in love with this idea of the adventure of the Tour Divide. And I knew I was fairly fit. I was a young guy, and I have a little bit of endurance to me, and I've done a fair amount of racing. And I decided at the time, though, that I would have to really up my game. And so we live in American Fork, Utah. It's about 20 miles from my work at campus. And I started riding my bike back and forth. And that started feeling pretty good. And I started racing in some in more bike races. And I started then, I'm like, I got to get more volume in. So I started riding over the Alpine Loop. So that's a mountain range between American Fork and Provo Canyon. It's about a 4,500-foot climb. It's about 36 miles from my door to school over the Alpine Loop. And I started riding to school and home from school over the Alpine Loop. So that added another 5-ish hours to my daily workouts. I would try to get a noon workout in. I'll admit I was a little obsessed. It was a little out of control, but I'll also admit that I don't care how fit you are. There's no preparing mentally for the I don't know, the daily efforts that are absolutely required in a race or an event like the Tour Divide. So it took not only this fitness side of things, but it took me going and doing a few events that were similar, some multi-day events that were self-supported, where you basically relied on yourself to get everything done. And I learned a lot, and I learned it the hard way, and it was a fantastic experience.
So I want our listeners to please be paying attention here. We're talking about bike racing. We're talking about long distance endurance, but we're really talking about what happens under the surface to allow something great to happen. It can be a race. It can also be taking a department from dysfunctional to high achievement. It doesn't matter where you apply this, it matters that you apply it. So I want to just take you mentioned here that endurance is one of the first lessons. And I just want to read a couple of paragraphs briefly. In the body, effort and work are the stimuli that trigger a series of events that leads to positive adaptations in strength, endurance, and power. That same effort can result in enhanced cognition, mood, and memory. Work pays off in the short term by accomplishing the task in front of us, but it pays off even more in the long term by improving physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual outcomes and enhancing confidence for future work. That is a mouthful. So, a lot of times there is a struggle, especially with some of our current societal trends, of wanting to shortcut the work. Let's do this faster, let's do this. But from what I get here, for something this difficult, there's no shortcut. Correct?
Not only, yes, I 100% agree, but I would add to that the work itself is not only the process that leads to an outcome, but it's the fuel that ends up driving the outcome. Without
Was about that.
without
Yeah.
the work, it just doesn't happen, and without the work, it doesn't provide the change in our psyche that allows for better work in the future. It's an irreplaceable component.
So again, I'll be talking to you, doctor, and also to our listeners here. This is an important thing we just heard. It's an irreplaceable component. So when you're working, because not only have you done this event, you run a department in academia. You have incredibly smart people around you that have their own ways of thinking. How do you, especially with a student who's trying to make some shortcuts, who may not have done hard things in her or his life, how do you help them see that it is an irreplaceable component? And you may be the first one to deliver that message.
It's a great question, and that does happen in some cases. I think what is necessary is to provide an experience where work is a central component, allow the person to see the outcome, and then circle back to help them understand that it was the work that got them there. It wasn't some magic potion. It wasn't AI. It wasn't anything. It was their effort that got them there. And there's an amazing transformation that happens, especially in students, where once they understand that they can do that, they gain confidence quickly and it builds quickly. And they start building on those previous efforts and outcomes to accomplish pretty miraculous things. When you work with a graduate student, for example, it goes from this learning the what and how and even the why sometimes to this place where they start questioning everything, the why nots, what if we approach it this different way? And that level of thinking leads to a really meaningful question. And then that meaningful question leads them to this process of being creative and solving a problem. And when they solve that problem, man, it feels good for them. And understanding the amount of work that got them there gives them an incredible amount of confidence.
So I want to get back to the training. Now, some of our listeners I know live along the Wasatch Front in Utah that goes from Ogden down to Provo. Um, but Dr. Hopkins here just mentioned this going up around. It's this massive mountain. It's called Mount Timpanogos, and it's an 11,000 some foot mountain. And I've ridden up the canyon about halfway until my son, who was riding with me, decided that he did want, it was on the day he graduated from BYU. And I think he looked back and realized that he would like his father at his graduation. So we flipped back around and, flew down the hill. But this is an incredible ride. And I want to just read again from the article. I started riding my bike everywhere, including to work from our home in American Fork and back. When that became easy, I woke up earlier and rode over the mountains to and from work. I raced every race I could find time for, including 24 and 24-hour events, 12 and 24-hour events. I rode my bike in winter snow and often at night in the mountains. Adam, his riding partner, and I would load our bikes with gear and ride for multiple days across deserts and mountains of the West. I noticed my fitness and ability to tolerate discomfort drastically improved. The work was paying off. So the physical training, I think, is fairly obvious. You increase the miles, you increase the intensity, you increase the pace. But talk to us a bit about how that paralleled with mental training and the mindset shifts.
Yeah, I can't overstate this. Somebody can be super fit and show up and race a 24-hour event, for example, and they get to a place where their mind's just saying, "Nah, this isn't going to work. We're done."
Mhm.
And it's really easy at that point to start focusing on negative things, to pay attention to the things that hurt a little bit more, and convince yourself very quickly that you're done.
Mhm.
Um, However, when you finish something like that, you come back the next time and go, yeah, I get it. I'm going to feel like that. But I know I can go further. And
Mhm.
body's made to go further. And I just need to convince the mind, to let me go a little further. And then it becomes almost you've done it a few times now. It becomes almost an afterthought where, I can do this. I'm going to hurt. I'm going to get nauseous. I'm going to feel pretty lousy for a few hours. But there's going to be a moment after that few hours where I feel incredible
Mhm.
and I can get there. I
Mhm.
think that's the shift that occurs.
What parallels in your leadership position there at BYU? Uh, the chair of a department that's very respected. BYU in athletics has been growing leaps and bounds. Have a very good young friend who graduated in exercise science a few years back, who just loves it and just couldn't say enough about the program. But leading in academia is tough. Parallels in what you've learned in writing that you've been able to apply at the worksite?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, academia maybe more than the kind of private industry is like trying to drive a barge. Everything turns a little slowly. So somebody like me, I tend to be as impatient as the best of them. So, you have to understand that uh, it's going to take a few defeats in order to get to the victory, and that often happens. And I think you kind of establish a culture that way where it's okay. We lost this one, but let's keep pushing, and we're gonna get there. And when a few years ago we established a new strategic plan, and that strategic plan was pretty lofty, and it felt a little maybe a little ambitious. And it got to be the point where we took a few lumps in the process of trying to work towards it, But then we saw a few victories, and it was just the same process. You gain some confidence, you start pushing, you know you're going to get a few knocks, you know, you're going to hit a few speed bumps, but you know you're also going to get there. And I think when that becomes part of the culture, man, you've got some really good momentum.
So I could read the paragraphs, but they won't do it the justice you're going to do it. One of the most impressive parts of this article, Dr. Hopkins is in the middle of this gruesome race, and he has to make it to a little town. It's Colorado, Silverton, Colorado.
Correct. Yeah.
So Silverton, Colorado has to be hit by 7 in the evening, or else a lot of things are going to be going wrong. And I'll just let you take it from there.
Yeah, so the race is called the Colorado Trail Race. It's a pretty I don't it's pretty grueling. It's all single track and it's brutal single track. In fact, about 20% of it is unrideable. It's hike a bike. And I did not fully appreciate what I was getting myself into. But Silverton from the start in Durango was only about 78 miles. And I thought for sure the race started at 4 a.m. And I'm thinking in 15 hours, if I can't get to Silverton, then there's something really wrong with me. Well, I did not get to Silverton. In fact, I didn't even get close. In fact, 7 p.m. came and went, 8, 9, 10, 11 p.m. came and went. And I'm at this point in a bad mental place. Physically, I'm destroyed. Imagine hiking miles in cycling shoes. I had these giant blisters. My back was sore. Everything hurt. My head's pounding because of the elevation. We're climbing up around 13,000 feet. It was just brutal. And I remember I'm trying to ride along this little trail with my terrible light, and I cross this little stream, and I get my tire lodged between a couple rocks, and I find myself going over the bars, and I'm sitting now in this stream. I've hit my head. I'm bleeding, and I'm just sitting there thinking, I wanted to do this. This was the dumbest decision I ever made. And so I decided then I was done. I really did. I just decided this was dumb. I'm still not close to Silverton. It's the middle of the night. I decide I'm just going to roll my sleeping bag out right there, right off the trail. I roll it out. I climb in. I'm cursing the idea of this whole mess. I eventually kind of nod off to sleep, and enough so that when I didn't wake up till the sun started coming up over the eastern peaks. And I remember I'll never forget this memory or the feeling, to be honest. I sat up, I looked out in front of me, and I was sitting on the edge of this enormous mountain meadow. I was probably somewhere between 11 and 12,000 feet at the time. And there's morning dew on this meadow. The meadow is completely full of wildflowers. It is purples and whites, maybe a few reds. I just remember sitting there thinking, where was this yesterday? I missed it. I cannot believe I missed this. And it was almost devastating, to be honest. But I felt this urge to somehow pay more attention. But I was still completely convinced I was done. So I knew I had to get about 7 or 8 miles into Silverton. Luckily, the trail turned into a descent. It was pretty fun. Getting into Silverton. Silverton's this little bitty town, mining town. It's got an old-fashioned dirt main street with boardwalks along both sides. And I again have this distinct memory of sitting on that boardwalk eating this giant burrito, thinking to myself, I just I just can't believe I missed all those flowers yesterday. I can't believe I missed it. I was so focused on giving to Silverton. And I decided then that I wasn't going to miss any more meadows. I decided I would continue despite some of the fears I had of continuing in those circumstances. Essentially, I was worried about getting struck by lightning once I get above tree line the next afternoon. And I decided I would pay attention to those meadows of flowers, and I did. And it turned into 5 incredible days of riding. In fact, it was the turning point. I would have never ridden the Tour Divide if I had not continued from that moment. That's what taught me that good things were around the corner. And then I had
So from this was 2015,
13. Yep.
13. So, and again, there are some people listening thinking, oh, yeah, right. because we do have some, a few cynical and skeptical people listening,
Sure.
as most of us probably should be at one or two times in our lives. But how have you used that lesson in your leadership off the bike?
Yeah, it's changed my life. I'll be honest. I learn a lot of lessons on the bikes. Other people have different means by which they learn things. To me, I learn things when I break down all the physical and mental barriers and I get right down to it. I get down kind of to the core. And this was one of those experiences. And I'll be honest, I'm a task-driven person. I make lists. I like to check things off lists. It gives me a sense of satisfaction. But this taught me that despite the list, I got to look around, pay attention to relationships, pay attention to the people that are doing the things, not just the task or the thing itself. And it has enriched not only my life, but it's certainly my professional endeavors where I've made some really fantastic connections with people, and those connections have turned out to be not only personally fulfilling, but productive in the workplace.
I want to read another paragraph to kick off my next question here. Everyone is working through emotional, physical, and spiritual challenges, and challenges in school, relationships, work, callings, and family. There will be rough terrain, blisters, and crashes, but there will also be a meadow of flowers. Will we see it? We must pay attention to and appreciate the flowers, and we must learn from the rough trail. The process, not the product, will allow us to find joy on our way to the finish. Um, there's a great book called Atomic Habits by James Clear, and he has a quote, and I paraphrase it. We don't rise to the level of our goals, we fall to the levels of our processes or systems.
Yeah.
So, talk to us about the difference between a good process versus just a goal.
Yeah, I grew up with the goal in mind. I really did. I worked hard towards goals and it got me places. It really did. It helped me accomplish some things. But the process of getting there was pretty dreary at times, I'm not going to lie. It's important, or maybe even I should say it's more important to get there with the journey in mind, not just to get there. And I've really learned that. I can't overstate that. It's something that's turned me into a different person. It's made me happier. It's made me less cynical. It's helped me to see the good in people, despite the fact that I get frustrated with them sometimes. And that has allowed me to work with those people in order to help them be more productive and me, to be honest.
So, dig in a little bit more on what you just said, because that is so important about a deeper vision of the people we work with. Um, any thoughts for leaders that are new on this route of how that can be put into place? You still get frustrated, so it's not eliminating the frustration. That's human. But
Yeah.
how do you overcome the frustration to pull up alongside of them and say, let's move in a different direction?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know if there's one way to do it. I'll say the way I do it is I love to empower people, try to help them understand and see the good things that have happened, and then use that as a foundation to help them improve in the areas where I think they're deficient. Um, I can't say that always works. There are still people who just don't get it, to be honest. But
Mhm.
generally speaking, when somebody's empowered and then they see the good and understand that you're coming from it from that place, I think it makes a difference, or at least it has in my experience.
In my experience, and on a parallel question here, I think a lot of people right now, due to some societal situations, they've never been challenged. And because they haven't been challenged in a real significant way, they're accepting of mediocre. And I'm absolutely convinced that when people taste elite, not eliteness, I'm better than you, but something that really presses all it literally humbles them, as you said, to the core, strips away everything. It almost becomes addictive because that feeling of wow, whether it's mastering a concerto or writing a race like this or dominating a really tough material or study course in college, how do you, it opens up a whole new perspective. And how do you get somebody engaged enough to say, or to accept from you, you can, Carl, you can do better here. You haven't been doing poorly, but there's a whole bunch of capability in you that you're not realizing. How do you get them onto an elite pathway of, I want to do that? How do you do that?
Again, I don't know if I have the right answers here, but I have the answers that I think work for me. And one of those things is I try to be as confident as I can in them. This is going to happen. We are going to get here as a department. I need you. You are the central component to us getting here as a department. And it's been bumpy. We've suffered some setbacks, but we are going to get here. And I'm going to help you. And you need to look around and see who else has the tools to help you. And we're going to get here. And I don't know how many times I've had somebody in my office where I just said, we're going to do it. It doesn't matter if you think we can do it right now or not. We're going to do it. And people will tell you who I work with that I hate the idea of bringing up or talking about an idea and then just talking about all the reasons we can't do it. It just drives me crazy. I hate it. It I just think that is the worst direction of thinking on earth. Instead, let's talk about all the things we can do that could make it work, and then let's try it. And then we'll take the data, see what we have, and we'll adjust as necessary. But if we start from a place of defeat, we're never getting there.
So I run into people all the time, and I've been in this state myself of what they call false positivity of let's just, if we're positive enough, we can do everything. And there's a ton of rolling eyes of saying, no, not in my life. And then they start down the path of all the reasons positive doesn't work. When you run into somebody like that as a department chair, or even as an athlete, how can you help them say, yes, I understand, and yet it's doable? How do you pull them there?
So I was on the opposite. I'm going to tell a quick story. I was on the opposite end of this about 20 years ago. I was a young faculty member. We were having these meetings about this initiative that was going on campus, that upper administration, they really wanted this one thing to happen. And I got to tell you, I was like, this is the dumbest thing. I can't believe we're doing this. What are we doing? So we're having this meeting. There's an academic vice president there. The academic vice president happened to be Garrett Gong, who is now in the leadership of the church.
Mm-hmm.
And so interestingly, he's the one trying to convince us that this thing should happen. And I remember going up to him afterwards and just saying, are we trying to jam square pegs into round holes? This seems like a waste of our resources in some ways. And he put his hand on my shoulder and just matter-of-factly said, Dr. Hopkins, you're a smart guy. You'll figure it out. And that was it. He left. And I gotta tell you, at first I was like, how dare he? He didn't even listen to me. But in reality, I sat back and said, I am a pretty smart guy. I think that there is a way we can figure this out. And to be honest, it took us a few years. It took a while, but we figured it out. And I always think back to he knew it could work. He just had to make sure that we got on board.
And I think sometimes as leaders, we make the mistake of thinking that we can't be direct.
Yeah.
I remember, in my life, I've been raised with somewhat of a your feelings are, they're your feelings and you have to honor your feelings. And I was in the Taylor building at BYU campus, room 177. Dr. Barbara Wheeler was the professor, and she was going over an overview of some of the major theories of psychology. And she was talking about Albert Ellis, who was just heartless in regards to Your feelings aren't facts and don't believe everything you feel. So I, as a very mature, and I say that in quotation mark, 25-year-old, decided that I would tell her that I thought she was wrong. That I'd been raised with my feelings are valid, etc. And she listened for a few minutes and then she said, Carl, you're at a crossroads. You can either accept what I said and have happiness, or you can accept where you've been and live a pretty dismal life. The choice is yours.
Yeah.
And then she looked at her watch, a true story, and said, our time's up today. Class is dismissed. And everyone filed out, doctor. And I'm sitting here thinking, somewhat like you with Dr. Gong, of, huh, that was about zero on the empathy scale. But looking back, it was an absolute tough message delivered at the right time that for me was a complete game changer
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
she was right.
I can empathize.
Yeah. So I want you to talk, and maybe I'll use this tomorrow. I live in the state of Oregon at 63 feet above sea level. And I did notice that running this morning, my air was a bit tighter than normal. So tomorrow, when I'm about 5 miles into my run and I'm thinking that this hill should be walked instead of run, on a serious note, what coaching do you give to me at that point for the mental game and to those that are leading a tough department, lots of challenges, wondering if they can do it? What's the mental game that they need to click in and start practicing?
So there's this really, really important lesson that I like to teach related to this bike race. And it relates to what you're talking about. So I'm going to give the quick version of this. Basically, there's this idea in cycling where it's easy to kind of work hard when you've got a big hill in front of you, right? You got no choice. If you don't pedal, you're going nowhere. So you got to pedal, and there's no way to avoid the work. But when you get to the top and you start going down the other side of the mountain, it is easy to coast. I mean, in fact, that's what most of us do naturally. That's the natural tendency, is to just get to the top and then coast your way down. Well, the phenomena is actually interesting. When you coast, you actually get more fatigued. When you actually have to start working again, because you haven't circulated, cleared debris from the active muscle, done several physiologic steps that are associated with the process of staying active, you actually are in a tougher place to start, and therefore it is going to be harder for the next hill. So the idea is that you try to keep your power constant, whether it's going uphill or going downhill. And the mantra is don't coast. So the idea is, when you got the hill in front of you, that's certainly when you work. You know it's there, you got to push through it. There's no question there. The question is, when you get to the top, are you going to take a break? Are you just going to mail it in and wait for the next hill? Or are you going to keep going and maintain the momentum, clear the debris from active muscle, and therefore make progress when others might not? And I think that's an important message. So the message I would give you is, of course, you got a hill in front of you. You got to go. Whether you slow down or not, you got to go. You got to get up the hill. But at least on a bike, when you get to the top, you still got to keep going. Maybe a little less. You can slow down a little bit, but you still got to keep pumping those muscles.
Excellent. One thing that I was surprised at, not surprised, but I was interested to read, is your thoughts about all the thoughts that you had in your, as I would call it, your meditative time on the bike,
Yeah.
of just running through all these great ideas. And you noted how important journaling had become for you. A little more on that?
Yeah, so for me, the bike is kind of my thinking place. I think I'm a person who has a lot of nervous energy. My mind's always going. I don't sleep well. I'm one of those people. I'm a little high strung. So when I get on the bike and I work hard for a while, I get to the point where I can kind of get down to the core of what's important. I can start thinking through some of those things. The problem is, when I get off the bike, I got all the nervous energy back again. So it's really hard for me now to make sense of all the things that made sense while I was on the bike. So now I get into this dumb habit, and especially on the Tour Divide, I got into the habit of pulling out my phone, turning on the audio recorder, and just talking out loud. trying to talk
Love
through
it.
some of the ideas. That was
Nice.
my form of journaling.
Excellent. And again, some of these things to our listeners here, a little nugget like that might be something that you say, oh, yeah, that's nice. But I'd really challenge you to put that into use because what I've seen and I learned and experienced is the brain gives us clues. It gives us ongoing insights. When we respect those, we get more of them. When we disregard those, it's like that source of inspiration just starts to say, well, maybe Carl or maybe Ty's just not ready for it yet. And it starts to shut off. And whether
Or
it's
we
audio or written, get it down.
agreed. Yeah, I think we get better at ignoring things once we've ignored them a few times. We get
Yep,
better and better at ignoring it.
absolutely. So as we come into a close here, you started the article with that you'd always been just so interested, and I'm going to read it here. Like many of you, I am fascinated with stories and accounts of survival and endurance. The question I find myself asking with each account is, how did they do it? Where did they find the strength, endurance, resilience, and perseverance? As some closing comments here, Doctor, what are any insights you would have on those four keys: strength, endurance, resilience, and perseverance that we haven't touched on?
So the first thing that comes to mind is there's this idea that I love that people are really into this idea that we can do hard things. Certainly the body, the mind, even the soul is designed to do hard things. I think we can take that a step further. In fact, I would argue that the body and mind, by the data, only adapt in a positive direction if they're stressed or if they're loaded in a way that forces adaptation. And I would argue that we, as a whole, are the same way. Not only can we do hard things, but we should want hard things. I think we should run towards hard things. When there's something in our life that looks like a challenge, I think we take it head on. And when we do that, not only do we have the kind of the positive outcome, but we also have this big, massive motivational component of confidence that leads us into the next hard thing. I'm convinced that those hard things are the things that give us satisfaction in life. And while we fill our lives often with things that may be fun or even easy, uh, I think they occupy no space in our psyche. They help us become nothing. It is only those hard things that help us become something.
And so, to our listeners, what we've heard today, if you're listening to this while you're on the bike or whether you're on the treadmill or driving to work, this is one you probably want to take some time and play back and take some notes. Because if you look at the great people, just think in your profession, whether you're a surgeon, whether you're a nurse manager, wherever you might be in healthcare, look at those that you admire most and ask them just to tell you how they got there. And I doubt that it's going to be an easy path. So, Dr. Hopkins, thank you so much for taking your time with us this afternoon. I've thoroughly enjoyed it and just want to thank you for your time.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure.